Hi, today we're going to talk about something that I probably should have talked about quite a long time ago. Just silly, but we're going to talk about what I'm writing. Let's get started. I'm writing a historical literary fiction. Putting a blurb together, synopsis together, all of that. And I'm going to be doing that in a few writing vlogs. So stay tuned for that. So the reason why I chose to start my first novel as a historical literary fiction is because I love the genre. Also, I wanted to tell some stories that have been underexplored, underrepresented, mainly regarding African Americans and other diverse populations. I also love history. I was a history major and paralegal major in college. I had a minor in theology, and so combining all of that together, which is, a love of research, if you really think about it, probably are the main reasons why I decided to go in that route. I love literary fiction. I think I've stated that before when I recorded the video about why I like to write or why I chose writing. And some of my favorite authors when I started reading a lot were literary authors, so I decided to combine the two loves, and there you have it. This story takes place in a couple of settings, but the main era of the story is set in the Reconstruction era, which lasted from about the end of the Civil War in America, about 1865, and up through the end of Reconstruction, which was about 12, almost 13 years later. This goes a little bit past that, maybe up until probably the early 1880s, but that's about as far as it goes. We have a little bit of backstory kind of before the Civil War began, and then we go up through the Reconstruction period, which is the main setting. Okay, so I have to tell y'all the story of who this book is about and I guess who it's for. So I am writing this novel for adults or mature high schoolers who would like to read about historical fiction and literary fiction. Who is the story about? So this is an interesting story. In 2020, I had kept having this reoccurring dream. I kept seeing a black woman dressed in clothing that was reminiscent of the West, a period that I really wasn't familiar with. After doing some research, I found out that the clothing was sometime after the Civil War, really up through the early 1900s. But for some reason, I kept seeing this lady in the West, which was fascinating to me because I had rarely heard of black people in the West except for like the Buffalo Soldiers. I don't even hear about them too much in the West now, and that's just being honest. Don't get it twisted. Black people are everywhere. I just didn't know they were there back then, except again the Buffalo Soldiers and stuff like that. I just didn't know there were many black women in the West. So anywho, I started seeing this lady, and when I tell you, I could feel her clothing, I could feel what she was thinking, I could see what she was seeing, I could touch what she was touching, but I prayed over it and I just felt like this is something that I feel I need to do. So anywho, to be honest, she wasn't the only person I saw It was real interesting. That's a story for another time. Anywho, back to her. So I saw this woman, and I believe I saw her at a time that is interesting for most people. Okay. And then she kept coming back to me, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And this went on for weeks. Like every day around between 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, mind you, at this period of time, I hadn't even thought about writing. My daughter, my youngest daughter, had told me that she wanted to be a writer. And I was like, you know, that's great. I encouraged her and everything. But when this lady came to me, felt like she wanted me to tell her story. And she kept coming to me. And it was almost like a bugging type of thing, right? It was almost like, are you going to tell people about me? Are you going to tell myself? Like, that was the kind of thing it was. And so I just eventually asked my daughter, you know, do you mind if I were to become a writer too? I had never thought about becoming a writer in life. Yes, I had written things before, but they were not fictional. I wrote mainly nonfiction for work or some poetry, but I had never written a short story. Definitely had never thought about writing a novel. And this lady just kept coming to me. And the more she came to me, I just started researching Black women in the West. After all that, another idea came to me that her story was a little bit in line with a well-known story that we all probably know of, but it was different in the vein of telling it from another perspective, a perspective that many classical stories have not explored, which is the thoughts and sentiments African Americans and other minority groups go through. And so that's kind of how the story came about. And when I can remember a dream, I always have found it to be very important to some aspect of my life. So I knew that this was very important. As I started to lay the story out, other things came up. Things that I really didn't know about, so much that I said, how could that possibly be? And I had to go and research it, right? So I have learned a lot while I have been doing this story. I have learned some things that, frankly, I got kind of upset about because I didn't understand why I had never been taught some of the things I looked at. And I'm trying to do her story justice. I'm trying to do other diverse characters. I'm trying to do their story justice, which is why I am having a sensitivity reader, probably a couple, to look at what I'm writing regarding their stories, because they intertwine as America does. We intertwine. So that is who I am writing for and writing about. The main thing about historical and literary fiction is how you're going to be writing. And I will tell you this much. Thank God I am a Christian. Because I've had to do a lot of praying throughout this process. Yes, I have. I'm doing what I call the WRR method, which is a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of research. I try to kind of stick to a schedule where I'm doing some writing during the week. I am not a die-hard on I must write every day or I must write these days. I'm disabled and I have to pay attention to when things are occurring. And so I may write a few hundred words one day and maybe feeling really, really good another day and write a few thousand. It just depends. But what I'll try to stick to is a weekly writing goal. I do a lot of research. The time period that I have, even though I'm only looking about anywhere from 12 to 17 years, there are a lot of things I have to research that are not as well known. The research has been a little bit more difficult for me because I'm looking at diverse stories, particularly regarding African American people that has not been recorded as much. And so that has been a challenge, a nice challenge actually, because I can travel. Yes, I have to travel to certain places because those records unfortunately are not online, believe it or not. So I travel to get information. I read a lot of first-person narrative. I have to resort to looking at a lot of government documents, which is fine, and a lot of pictures. I am not as keen on films because a lot of films are skewed towards what people who were in power would have wanted to produce. I do watch some films, but my research is more so based on scholarly research. First person narratives are my biggest go-to because I like to read what people who lived the experience would have written, would have stated. It's always best with historical research, if you can, to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I can't tell you how many books I've read, how many narratives I've read, how many places I've traveled to just to get a sense of the field, which in my case actually has worked out because a lot of the places I've had to travel to, they haven't changed much, okay, especially in the South. And so those are the resources I use. I also look at a lot of scholarly research. I've contacted colleges, books that kind of talk about this era. Thankfully, I found a lot that are fiction still do list bibliographic information, and so I've read quite a few of those items. And when you have a subject that is not widely discussed, you kind of have to do pieces and parts, right? So you take a first person narrative, or you take a book, you read some bibliographic articles, you read some other types of scholarly articles, you visit the places, you put this whole picture together. And how you determine if this is actually factual is you kind of have to fact check each against each other. And once you've come up with certain pieces of information that this was said here, oh, the same thing was said here, that's kind of how you can try to put things in a better frame of accuracy. And so, yeah, that's how I do it. The most asked question that I get is, when can we read your novel? Well, let me tell you. First, I'm still writing it, okay? Historical fiction is a lot of work. Work I love, don't get it twisted, but a lot of work. And so I have been actively writing since this year because this is my first novel. I had to learn how to write. Learning writing craft is one huge part. Now, my second book, I won't have as much to learn, even though I think you can continue to learn for a long time, which is great because I love to learn, right? But this novel has taken me a little bit of time. I expect to be finished with it by next year. Now, because I want to do traditional publishing, it's going to take a little longer for it to be out in the world because, again, I expect for that process to be probably lengthy. I know there are authors that have been fortunate enough to have things move quickly, but I want to be realistic and know that it may be a slower process because I want my book with a person that feels just as excited as I am about the book, in addition to really wanting to put it with the right publisher. So that's two huge hurdles. Not only that, once I finish with the book, I am going to have some beta readers look at it. I have to find a couple of sensitivity readers to look at it, because I'm going to have more than one diverse population in the group. And then of course I want to have a proofreader. I'm a pretty good proofreader. I actually do it on the side. I'm a sensitivity reader and a beta reader, but you need another set of eyes. You just can't be a jack all trades, master none now. So I know it's better for you to have another person review your work. I have no problem with that. It is a great thing to do. I believe it shows you what you cannot see, because you just cannot see everything. In saying that, I know that my goal is to finish writing the book before the summer of 2025 starts. So hopefully I can get it in the hands of beta readers, sensitivity readers, an editor, maybe even a developmental editor. Not sure yet about that. We'll see. And of course, I have ideas in my head about other books after that. But for this particular book, my goal is to have it finished sometimes by the start of summer. So hopefully I can go ahead and get into those query trenches sometime in the fall, once I've got feedback from other professionals and put that feedback into work. I have to do a little bit more traveling to get a little bit more work. I probably won't be finished with my part until sometime in the summer. The challenges I've faced in writing this novel has been about the research. Again, I love the research. I have to put myself on a time limit for research, because I can go on and on, right? Because I want to get as much accuracy as possible. Again, it is difficult with this particular subject that I'm doing, because there's not a lot of information. It actually becomes a great thing to be able to do fiction, but you want to get as much accurate information as you can get. Another reason is because part of the research involves traveling, and being on a limited income, I have to plan my travel in the best way possible. Sometimes that means waiting for a particular part of the year to travel, or waiting for somebody who can actually take me, and making sure that I've been doing well with the health department and that kind of thing. So all of that comes into play. Also, just getting people to interview, you have to look at people's time schedules and things like that, because again, I look at scholarly articles, and sometimes you want to speak with those people about their research and if they've come up with new things, that kind of thing. Also, just trying to ensure I am doing the best job I can in writing the information. So that means learning the craft of writing. I had to read quite a few craft books. It's fine. I have gone to quite a few conferences, looked at quite a few interviews, spoken to published authors, all of the things, right? And so just learning the craft of writing was somewhat difficult, because when I first started learning, the people that I was learning from, I don't want to say didn't know what they were doing, but it was, I think, difficult for them to explain what they were doing to another person, even though they obviously are great at what they do. But when you cannot explain it to me, it does not help me. So just trying to figure out some great mentors, which thankfully I have found some on YouTube, some reading books. I adopt them as my mentor, okay? Yes. So that's been that. And then the actual challenge of writing, because unfortunately, again, sometimes I'm a perfectionist and I do edit as I write. Most of the time I try not to, but it's just there. And maybe because I do proofreading and because I read other people's work, some things kind of jump out at me, and it's almost like seeing something and you're like, oh my God, can you please pick that up? I try my best not to. I try to get at least the whole scene and put it away and then go back to it, but sometimes that is difficult for me to do. I will not lie. So those have been the challenges. As far as my triumphs, we'll go back to writing. That has been a triumph for me. I have had some really great scenes, and I'm one of those writers that sometimes I write out of order. Yes, I do. But you know what? I have found when I get stuck on a particular scene or chapter, it is in my best interest to go ahead and write a chapter that I know is good, because in the back of my mind, and I learned this when I was in law school, when you're looking at something else, that same question you were having trouble with is actually working itself out in your brain. The brain is a wonderful thing. It is my friend, okay? So as I'm working on something else, I put the problem in my brain and it is working on it as I'm working on something else. And so writing has been a joy for me. I don't know what else to say. And again, like I've stated before, had I learned I could possibly become a writer or be in the writing industry, I never would have gone to law school. And that is no doubt. I love the law. I probably love the law because it's got a lot of history in it, right? And I used to love the old medieval cases and stuff. So I think my love of research while I was in law school has readily transferred over to my love of research for historical fiction and my love of literary fiction because of language. I love language. I love words. I just love reading things that matter and things that work. And so again, the two together have been great for me. Also, I have a lot of triumph in my writing because I have been a beta reader, because I've been a sensitivity reader, because I've proofread, because I've been able to enjoy reading other people's works. And I enjoy reading other people's works. I really do. Obviously, I hope someone will enjoy my work one day, but I enjoy reading other writers. And I love a good story. I love a good historical story that has the research. You could see it without them spewing it at you, right? So that is one of my goals. Also, finding some great mentors, even if they don't know they're my mentors. I have listed several YouTube channels or AuthorTube channels that have been great inspiration and motivation for me. And I will continue to do that. I try to list a channel at least every time I do a video, and hopefully I will continue to do that because there are so many channels and there are so many people that put their heart and soul into making a video just to teach people like me something, and I appreciate it, and I hope one day to do the same. So yeah, those have been my challenges and triumphs. I have a couple of historical and literary fiction floating around in my little notebook. So I have a lot of things I want to write about. It will mostly be historical, I will say that. This story is based in Reconstruction era. I did a short story and I'm going to turn it into a novel. I didn't want to really do a World War II thing, but I wanted to do a period kind of right before that. I feel like a lot of information has not been shared when it comes to African American lives during that period. So somewhere between the 1930s to 1940s, that era. And then of course my own growing up era, which I love, and that is between late 1960s to probably late 1970s. I'm usually working with a 10 or 12 year period here, but those are what I'd like to look at. Those are 3 stories that I know for sure I have. I'm also looking at kind of the Gilded Age, somewhere between 1900s to 1920s. So I am excited. Will I ever write a contemporary novel? I don't know. I might do one that is like a dual point of view, where I bring someone in the present to talk about something in the past. I've kind of looked at that, but for right now, I'm very, very satisfied with staying right before the Civil War up through like the 1970s. I'm cool with that, and I think because there has not been a lot of information about African Americans during that period. I'm not talking about, we're skipping the civil rights. I'm talking about disco era, stuff like that, right? I'm talking about that period. Civil rights is, I love every author that has sunk their teeth into that period, and there's always a way that you can tell a story differently from somewhere else. But right now, even though it's all civil rights, really, when you think about it, I'm going to skip that particular period we know as civil rights, kind of work on some eras that we may not know as much about when it comes to diverse population. Here's this week's channel shout out. Enjoy. Thank you again for joining me. If you have any other questions about my journey to become an author, writing historical fiction and/or literary fiction, please drop it in the comments. Please subscribe if you have not. We're going to have a lot of fun here. I know my genre is probably not something most people who are authortubers write about or talk about, but historical fiction writers and literary writers, we are here as well. So please drop down in the comments whatever genre that you write. I read a bunch of books, and coming up in the future, I'm going to be talking about my goals and things for 2025, what I hope to accomplish and things like that. But in the meantime, in between time, please read great books and do happy writing.